Welcome to Human Physiology. This online course is designed for allied health pre-professionals pursuing careers in nursing, physician's assistant programs, pharmacists, physical therapists, and other allied health careers such as radiology, sonographers, etc. So before beginning, just a very quick little bit about myself. I'm Dr. Leslie Blankenship-Williams, and I have my PhD from Scripps Institution of Oceanography in Marine Biology. Scripps is actually part of UC San Diego, and I received my PhD all the way back in 2005. Although my graduate research was not in the realm of human physiology, I started teaching human physiology shortly after I graduated, and I've been teaching it on and off ever since. So this marks my 17th year teaching human physiology. And one of the reasons I gravitate towards this class is because I find the human body incredibly fascinating. We are so complex, and every time I teach it, I learn something new myself. So that makes teaching this course extra exciting. For me, anyway. For you, it's going to probably be extra challenging. Because the human body is so complex, learning about how all the pieces fit together is quite a challenge. And as such, you're going to have to work very hard this semester to make sure that you conceptually understand how all the pieces fit together. If you don't have a complete and detailed understanding of an organ system and something feels a little bit fuzzy or off, you could easily bomb that section of the test. I say this every semester. You can understand 80 to 90% of the material and still only get a 50% on the exams, because you have to understand how all of it works together. And if you don't understand how a piece fits in, then your understanding of the entire machine, your body, falls apart. And you don't have the depth of knowledge that you need and the comprehensive knowledge that you need to really understand. So be forewarned, this class will probably be one of the most challenging that you ever take. The fact that it's online does you no favors, other than you can rewatch videos at your leisure. But if possible, a face-to-face course is always preferable because you can get that real-time dynamic interaction with the instructor. So again, I'm not necessarily trying to scare you away, but I do want you to understand what you've signed up for. This lecture is going to be the easiest one that you will get all semester. This is really just an introduction to themes in physiology and a little bit about how the course is structured. Let's start by talking about prerequisites. For Palomar College, it is highly recommended, and from my perspective, really mandatory, that you complete Bio 100 or Bio 102 or some equivalent class prior to taking this one. Taking human anatomy by itself is not enough, because you really need the cellular and molecular understanding of how biology works in order to understand physiology. And those concepts are taught in Bio 100 and Bio 102. So if you've taken Bio 100 or 102, you've probably learned that in the biological sciences, there's many different lenses that you can apply to the study of biology. In other words, you could look at everything from a really, really microscopic viewpoint, or you could look at everything from a really big viewpoint. If you were looking at things from a microscopic viewpoint, you'd be interested in molecules and cells. And if you were looking at things from a really big viewpoint, you'd be looking at ecosystems and biospheres. Look at the umbrella of physiology. It covers many of those lenses. But in reality, most of our discussion is going to be at the molecular and the cellular level. So having a really solid foundation in molecular and cellular biology is so critical to your success in this class. And that is why Bio 100 and or Bio 102 is highly recommended. if you're not at Palomar College and you're just watching these videos, any college level general biology course should suffice. When we think about human physiology, we also need to consider human anatomy. So in fact, in many colleges, anatomy and physiology are taught together as one course, such as like A&P1 and A&P2. At Palomar College, we break them up into separate courses, where human anatomy focuses on the form or the structure of the body, and physiology focuses on the function, the processes of the body. In reality, you really can't understand one without the other. So throughout this course, we will be referencing anatomy all of the time. And it is advised that you have completed a human anatomy course prior to taking this one. But if you haven't, you can still do okay in this course. You can still be successful. But it's just going to require a little bit more work on your part. And likewise, if you take human anatomy, your instructor will undoubtedly talk a little bit about the physiology, because you can't really understand one without the other. You really need both parts together to get a complete viewpoint of how the human body works. So in anatomy, it is convenient to break up the human body into what are called organ systems. And there's a number of organ systems. We will be covering most of these. And I don't want you to write any of this down. This is not useful information for you at this point, other than to just skim and kind of take a look at the terms. Let me show you how this course is going to be organized. So I've broken this course up into 4 exams, so 4 lecture exams, and each exam is going to cover at least 2 systems. So the first exam is going to cover cellular and molecular physiology. That's the foundation from which we're going to build all of the other organ systems upon. So we really have to work hard to make sure we have that solid foundation of cellular and molecular physiology. And then we're going to move into neurophysiology, the physiology of the nervous system. And that information will constitute the first exam. For the second exam, we're going to move into muscle physiology. Now, I'm not interested in the names of these muscles and their action. I'm interested in things like, how does a muscle contract? When does a muscle contract? How much tension does a muscle generate? That's the physiological lens that we're looking at. And then we're going to spend a lot of time on the cardiovascular system. Now, briefly, I want to point out that the cardiovascular system also goes by another name, and that is the circulatory system. I personally prefer cardiovascular system for no good reason other than that was how I was taught, and I like the name. Cardio refers to heart, vascular means blood vessels or vessels, but in this case blood vessels. And so cardiovascular system really talks about the system from an anatomical viewpoint, where the circulatory system, which is another name for the same system, really looks at it from a physiological point. In other words, it's circulating blood. That's the point. So those 2 systems are going to comprise exam 2. When we move into exam 3, we will first look at blood. And from blood, we'll jump off and take a look at the immune system. And then we'll also take a look at the pulmonary system or the respiratory system. And almost everything else is kind of crammed into exam 4. We will briefly touch on the digestive system before diving really deep into the renal system. That's going to be your kidneys. And from there, we'll look at the endocrine system, and we'll use the endocrine system to explore reproductive endocrinology. So this is basically how the course is organized. Although everything is going to build on that cellular and molecular foundation, nothing is cumulative, meaning that when you are finished with neurophysiology in exam 1, you don't need to retain all of that detail for exam 2, etc. So each exam kind of represents its own module, and then once you're done with that, keep your notes, obviously, but you can kind of put it aside and get ready to learn the next system. So now let's explore some themes in physiology. This is a good time to get out some paper and a pen or a pencil and start taking some notes. So in my opinion, there are 4 kind of major themes that show up over and over and over again. And one is the structure-function relationship. The structure-function relationship refers to the idea that the structure dictates the function and the function dictates the structure. It's that back and forth between anatomy and physiology. So in other words, we're going to be looking a lot at anatomical design and how it helps the physiology. So how does the anatomical structure help the physiology? And so you'll see this theme show up multiple times, including this first exam module. Another concept is transport. So molecular transport, which largely focuses on moving certain substances in and out of a cell, is paramount to most physiological systems. You will see the importance of molecular transport basically in every single system. Muscle physiology, neurophysiology, cardiovascular physiology, the immune system, blood, etc. Transport is so important. So we're going to spend a lot of time covering molecular transport early on in this semester to make sure that you have a really great solid foundation that you can build from and apply it to system after system. Homeostasis is a concept that is often associated with physiology, and it's easier to describe than define. So definitely write this term down, homeostasis, and then we're going to work on describing it rather than writing out a one-sentence definition for it. My body temperature, what is it? Assuming that I don't have a fever and I don't have hypothermia, my body temperature is probably around 98 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the appropriate temperature that my body needs to stay at for all of the processes to work. If my body temperature elevates to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, I'll die. If my body temperature is lowered to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, I'll die. In other words, it is really important that my body temperature remain at 98 degrees plus or minus 1 or 2 degrees for the appropriate functioning of all of my physiological processes. And if my body temperature gets too high or too low and I don't fix those deviations, I don't bring it back to 98 degrees, then I could suffer some serious problems. So most people are familiar with the concepts of hyperthermia. So hypothermia is when you get too hot, like a heat stroke, or we hear about those really tragic situations of, like children being left in, or dogs being left in cars. Getting too hot can kill you. Getting too cold, that's hypothermia. Like people getting stuck in an avalanche can kill you. So clearly we have a general understanding that getting too hot or getting too cold is bad because bad things happen and it can be fatal. Disruptions in homeostasis often lead to disease. So again, this is the disease-free state where you're functioning like you're supposed to. And that's really the best description of homeostasis that I can give you. So let me give you some other things that are regulated by physiological processes to be maintained via homeostasis. The oxygen saturation levels in your blood should be around 98-99% or greater. So if your oxygen saturation levels start dropping, what happens? You might start breathing harder to try to get more oxygen in. So your body has a way to compensate to try to get more oxygen to your blood. There's some other things your body might do as well, but that's one that might be obvious. If I drink 3 liters of water, what's going to happen? Well, now my body has too much water, and so I'm going to urinate out a lot of extra water. I'm going to need to use the restroom, and when I use the restroom, I'm going to be urinating quite a lot of fluid, and it's going to be pretty dilute. In one hole and out the other, kind of a thing. Conversely, if I'm really dehydrated, I will hardly urinate at all, and the urine that I do produce will be extremely concentrated. So urination is a way to kind of regulate the body's water balance. So hopefully you kind of get the idea of homeostasis. So what are some other things that are maintained via homeostasis? Your blood pH is maintained via homeostasis. The amount of CO2 in your blood, your body temperature, your hormone levels, your immune system function. What are some things that are not maintained via homeostasis? I'll give you one. The amount of fecal material that you produce. And you might go, ew, gross. But actually think about it. You're not regulating that. Rather, it's just waste. It's just leftovers, right? So your fecal material is largely just the food that you didn't absorb. It's not something that you're going, oh, it needs to be exactly 10.5 grams today, or else. No, it's not regulated. I mean, there are associated functions such as absorption of nutrients and the general health of your digestive system that are regulated, but the fecal amount is not. So that's an example of something that is not regulated via homeostasis. Okay, so again, when homeostasis is disrupted, it can often lead to disease. Looking at the physiology of disease gets its own name. It's called pathophysiology. And we'll be looking at pathophysiology a lot because it's very instructive. Looking at how something can go wrong helps us really understand why it's so important that it goes right. The final theme is something called a feedback loop. And typically with a feedback loop, we really mean a negative feedback loop. But this is something we'll see a lot in physiology. And I'm going to give you an example of two negative feedback loops that are pretty easy to understand. So I talked about body temperature, and we're going to come back to this body temperature idea. Your body core should be 97 to 99 degrees Fahrenheit. Interesting little factoid. You may have learned that your body temperature should be 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, but the reality is that people's body temperature actually varies a little bit more than that. It's not quite so precise. So anything between 97 and 99 is considered to be normal. But obviously, that body temperature can elevate or drop depending on your activities. So let's say that it's pretty warm out and you're going to start running. Well, what happens when you start running? Your body temperature is going to elevate. Why is your body temperature going to elevate? Because you're moving, and movement produces heat. And then you're metabolizing food, which also generates heat. So now what? Well, now your body is at risk of overheating. So one of the things that you will do in response is you will sweat. And as long as it's not too humid out, that's pretty effective at inducing evaporative cooling. The water evaporates off of your skin and leaves behind a cooler skin. So it cools your skin down to help bring your temperature down. So this is a feedback loop. One more little story about this. Not everybody can sweat. I had a student in my class over 10 years ago who was badly burned in the 2007 San Diego wildfires. In fact, her sister died in that wildfire. She was with her sister, but she ended up being really badly burned. So a large part of her body was covered in scar tissue, and there are no sweat glands in the scar tissue. She really wanted to be a photographer, and she worked at the Wild Animal Park in northern San Diego. But the problem was she couldn't produce enough sweat to cool her body off. So she had to quit that job because she couldn't sweat enough to cool her body off to tolerate the high temperatures that the safari park endures, particularly in the summer months. So again, there's an example of, a disrupted feedback loop and then, a potentially problematic outcome. So now let's look at the other side. What happens when your body gets cold? Many of you, I'm sure, have experienced a foray into the ocean waters. San Diego is reasonably warm, but not too warm. And so if you spend extended time in the San Diego Ocean, you're probably going to be cold. So let's just say you're surfing, boogie boarding, swimming, snorkeling, whatever you're doing out there in the cold water, and your body temperature is going to start dropping. So what is the response of your body to try to help preserve or maintain that body temperature at 97 to 99 degrees? And kind of two things will happen. One thing that you'll do is you'll start to shiver. And the shivering is muscle motion. And by contracting those muscles over and over and over again, that generates heat. So movement generates heat. But the other thing that you'll do is you'll actually redistribute your blood flow. You'll shunt blood away from your extremities where heat loss is more common, your feet, your fingers, your nose, your ears, and the heat or in the blood will be kind of concentrated more in the core where all of the important stuff is, all of your important organs that really need that, 98-degree Fahrenheit body temperature. So this is why if somebody's been out in the ocean and you feel their hands are much colder than their stomach would be or their core because blood has been shunted away from those extremities. And in fact, if blood is shunted away from those extremities too long, the tissue can die. And this is what happens in frostbite. And one of the reasons why we see frostbite in things like the nose, the ears, the fingers, and the toes, because those extremities are farthest away from the core, and if you send blood there, you lose too much heat. So the body is like, we're not going to send blood there because heat right now is more important than tissue health. So both of those hopefully will generate warmth and preserve warmth to bring your body temperature back up. These are examples of feedback loops in terms of maintaining homeostasis. Here's a similar image that describes basically what I just went through. You don't need to pause this and copy it all down. I'm simply using this as an easy to understand example demonstrating a negative feedback loop. Our final topic is going to be water. Water is very important in the body, and water is distributed to different spots. So what we're going to do is take a look at those different spots. And for that, I'm going to draw you over to my iPad. So you'll definitely want to copy this down. The first thing to understand is that water is broken up into whether or not it is inside of a cell or outside of the cells. If the fluid is inside of the cell, we call that intracellular fluid, and we make the abbreviation ICF. So ICF is going to be used all over the place, and it means inside the cell. If it is outside of the cell, then we call that extracellular fluid. And extra means outside, like extraterrestrial is an alien from outside of this world. So extracellular fluid is abbreviated ECF. So I'll quickly sketch this out for you so you can get a visual representation of what I mean. So we're going to draw some cells. I'm drawing my plasma membrane, my nucleus. The inside of my cells I'm coloring in kind of a light blue. That's going to be my intracellular fluid, or ICF. And my extracellular fluid is the fluid that is outside of the plasma membrane. So whatever fluid is outside of those plasma membranes is going to be extracellular fluid. And in my example, it's dark blue. So the average adult male has 42 liters of water. Obviously, the greater your body size, the more water you'll have, and the amount of water differs between males and females a little bit. But regardless of how much water you have, about 2/3 of it is concentrated in the intracellular fluid, and the other 1/3 is concentrated in the extracellular fluid. The extracellular fluid deserves a little bit of special consideration. When the extracellular fluid is located in the blood, it gets a special name called plasma. Extracellular fluid can be located in other specialized compartments as well, such as cerebrospinal fluid. But in general, most of the extracellular fluid is either contained in a blood vessel or it's just bathing other cells. Extracellular fluid is further differentiated into two subcategories. If the extracellular fluid is contained in a blood vessel, then we call that plasma, and plasma is the watery component of blood. If the extracellular fluid is simply bathing cells surrounding the cells, we call that interstitial fluid, and we use the abbreviation ISF. So in my drawing here, the yellow plasma is shown contained in the blood vessel, while the kind of lavender extracellular fluid that's surrounding generic cells not in a blood vessel is interstitial fluid. So around 80% of all extracellular fluid is interstitial fluid, and 20% is plasma. One last thing, do not conflate ICF and ISF. It's very easy to do. ICF is intracellular fluid, and ISF is a type of extracellular fluid. That concludes our lecture. I'll see you for the next one on experimental design.